welcome back. In our interview with Secretary Glickman, he was talking about a report that the Bipartisan Policy Commission, actually Bipartisan Policy Center, has put together. For some reason, I always want to say their name wrong. A report that the Bipartisan Policy Center has put together to talk about their ideas on how to fix government, how to fix dysfunction, how to fix polarization. And as you know, we try to have a solution-based show here, so I thought I'd spend some time doing in this next segment is talking about their report and pointing out a few of the more interesting aspects of the report. So we're going to go to the whiteboard, and we'll move over to the whiteboard here. So again, this is the Bipartisan Policy Center, and within the Bipartisan Policy Center, they have a commission on policy reform. I notice that these groups like to have commissions and committees and all kinds of things that do problem solving, but in this case, I think this is a really interesting work product they've come up with, and it's got a fancy title, which I'm going to read. Governing in a Polarized America. Well, that's what our show is about. A bipartisan blueprint. Blueprint's always a good word to use, too. A bipartisan blueprint to strengthen our democracy. That sounds great, doesn't it? A bipartisan blueprint to strengthen our democracy. So anyway, let's take a look at some of the things they've come up with to be part of this blueprint to strengthen our democracy, and some interesting points I want to go over with you today. The first point that I found very interesting is their notion of spending more time in D.C. And in the report, it mentions the fact that congressmen and women are only spending 53% of the potential work week time across a year in D.C. Now, if they're only spending 53% in D.C. working on congressional matters, the corollary to that is 47% of the time they're not in Washington, they're not doing Washington-based problem solving. Now, there's a lot of things they could be doing when they're not in D.C. They're back in home, they're working with their constituents, they're doing problem solving back in district. But the biggest problem I think this report is focused on is that members of Congress are spending a huge amount of time just raising money. That's what they have to do to get reelected, and it's taken away from their day job that we hired them for, which is to be the congressmen and women and solve problems for us. So 53% is not a lot of time. And what the report is suggesting is that they have a new way of approaching how they're going to spend time in Washington. And the report itself recommends that they go to 5-day work weeks, because a lot of their work weeks right now are actually 3-day work weeks. They'll come in late on a Monday, early on a Tuesday, and leave by late on a Thursday. So they want to have 5-day work weeks. And they want them to commit to do this in groupings of 3 weeks at a time. So they're suggesting that we have 5-day work weeks that run for 3 consecutive weeks, which arguably means the congressmen and congresswomen are staying over the weekend. And then they would have a reprieve of going home for 1 week. So basically 3 weeks on, 1 week off. I think this is important for a lot of reasons. And one of the reasons is that it refers to a report that I talked about in a previous show where the head of the University of Pennsylvania suggests that we do not have appropriate levels of camaraderie, and again, civility was one of our words, spirit of working together. And the notion is that not only should they be in Congress spending more time working together, but they should spend more time playing together, socializing together, getting to know each other, having the spouses get to know each other. Something that's really a throwback, maybe even the 70s or 80s, before we got into more pressures of fundraising and more time away from Washington. So spending more time, socializing, and working are all important aspects of the report that's been put out by the Bipartisan Policy Center. Another interesting shift, and again, these are not necessarily unique ideas, but they're being certainly sanctioned by the group now, is to go to a 2-year budget cycle. You know, we've had a lot of trouble getting any budgets passed in Washington, and the one we have now was the first one we had, 3 or 4 years? So the notion is if you go to a 2-year cycle, you're not pressed with this problem of having to have a new budget every year. And there are a lot of states that are going to longer-term budget cycles. So rather than having every year infighting, every year lack of budgeting, every year new problems to solve, you go to a 2-year cycle. You can always fine-tune the budget within those 2 years, but the notion is you'd have more time to spend on the budget, more deliberative, maybe looking at longer-term solutions, although 2 years is not a longer term per se, but it's certainly, let's say, double the time of a 1-year budget, and it would just put less pressure on Congress and maybe just produce a better budget cycle. I like that one. Another hot button of ours has been redistricting, and they want to have redistricting commissions in every state. We've previously talked about redistricting and redistricting commissions. We have the experience of what's going on in Illinois right now. We're going to have an update on a future show. But again, it's just very informative that they would have jumped on this bandwagon and have suggested that we have this in every state. And again, the notion of redistricting commissions is to avoid the fact that we have very few competitive races. When you read the report, you'll see they want to have much more competition in races. Right now, we have predictions of as few as 20 competitive congressional races heading into November. And even the most liberal, to use that word in the numerical sense here, the liberal guess we have is only 100 and some competitive races out of 435. So we don't have a competitive Congress, and the notion is that more redistricting commissions, more balanced map drawing is going to get us there. The last one that I like that they brought up, and we've talked about this before, the notion of public service, getting involved, staying active, putting your toe in the water of government. They'd like to see everyone in the 18 to 25 age cohort have an obligation to do 1 year of public service. Again, it could be military, it could be Peace Corps, it could be a lot of things. They want the youth of America to jump into government, jump into problem solving at the governmental level, and they see that not only as an important step for young people in their maturation, but it's a way to get them involved, get them started in government, be a way to draw in better talent to government, because maybe if you put your toe in the water for 1 year, you stay longer and you help solve problems. So these are four of the more interesting aspects of the report that I liked and wanted to point out to you. This fifth one that I've written in blue is, interestingly enough, not a recommendation of the report. The report is not recommending that we have a viable national third party. That's actually something that I'm recommending. My E-Party novel talks about it, and I'm going to talk more about the need for a third party in different shows. But what I thought was interesting about the report is they went out of their way to suggest that we don't need this right now. But the fact that they mentioned it means it's on their minds. They know it's out there. They know that a third party is perhaps the most viable alternative of all to avoid dysfunction and to avoid polarization, but they're not ready to go there yet. Yet I thought it was very significant that they pointed out in their report that they're not ready to go there yet. They actually gave it a seat at the table, so to speak, even though they immediately took it off the table. So these are some of the highlights from the report. And again, in furtherance of our conversation with Secretary Glickman, I just thought I'd show you some of the highlights and give you some food for thought.